From Chris. Do you mean you hear him twice?
I have my echo off. So let's see. Audio.
There we go. I think I see us on YouTube.
Okay, let's see. I don't see it yet, but then that doesn't mean it's not there. So
I'm seeing it. It says excellent connection.
all right.
So it's there. We'll just see what happens.
I see it. Yep.
Well, that didn't take any time at all. We're geniuses. Who says Gen X isn't tech savvy?
We're amazing.
Yeah. How many hours later?
Listen, I did a quiz last night. I must have put 2 hours at least worth of tech setup into trying to get this quiz thing to work. But that's why I'm able to do this right now, was because I had all this experience from yesterday. So,
all right, studio chat. We've got 4. I don't know who the 4th is. Might be one guest in here. I'm not sure because we do have a way that if somebody wanted to download the Riverside software, they can always come in as well, but it could just be a phantom. Live chat, it looks like everything's up. So, do we want to take a stab at this?
Let's do it.
Someone said that they were hearing echoing.
From whom?
They said from me, but I have my echo cancellation on, so I'm not
I
sure.
see it. Mine's on, Shell's on.
Mine's on.
Mine's on.
So, I mean, I think we can get started.
Yeah, that's fine. Audio output. I don't know. I probably have something in here crazy. Who knows?
Well, at any rate, hello and welcome to the ThreeView Mirror podcast. Today we are experimenting with our second show that we are filming, just like back in the 80s before a live studio audience. You're going to hear things uncut, uncensored, unedited, and get a sneak preview to what will be a future episode of our podcast going out to the masses. But if you join us, you'll be able to be a part of the experience. You'll be able to play along. You'll be able to add comments, some of which we will actually add to the virtual visual video podcast itself. Now, what will you be adding to? Well, that's a ThreeView Mirror podcast. It's a podcast where 3 friends, 3 Gen X era buddies come together and discuss 3 different topics from the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. Looking back in our ThreeView Mirror and discussing things that were relevant to pop culture in that day. But it's not just about 3 random topics, because the host that's selected every week knows something that the other 2 in the studio audience don't. And that is that there's a hidden connection between the 3 topics. And our job is, as we discuss each of these topics, to figure out what is linking the 3 together. And this week, our host is none other than Chris Clues. Now, my name is John Katrides, better known as Gen X Jono, across my social media platforms. And I'm joined with Gen X Shell, Rochelle Oblak. Why don't you say hi, Shell?
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me still. I'm messing with sounds. Okay, I'm not. Somebody just said the sound is good. Don't touch anything. No more echo.
There we go. And then finally, Chris Clues, who is our host this evening. Welcome to the ThreeView Mirror podcast. Take it away, Chris.
All right. Okay, so I'm really excited about today. I'm always excited to host, by the way. So I'm super excited today about my 3 categories that all have one secret connection, as John said. Now, I want to preface this by saying that this particular connection, depending on how you connect it, could be defined in 2 different ways. So just keep that in mind. It is one connection, but it could be defined in 2 different ways to get your credit for this ThreeView Mirror pop quiz. All right. So you guys ready to hear the 3 categories?
Ready when you are.
Okay. My three categories for today are Casey and the Sunshine Band, 80s slasher films,
Ooh,
and a Ouija board.
a Ouija board.
Yes. I put that in there just for you, John, because I saw
Yeah,
your post this week.
I've had some issues with Ouija boards, and I never really knew how to pronounce it. But yeah, that one hits home. I like them. I love the three topics. Shaw, what do you think?
I love the three topics too, because definitely two have a creep factor there. So I love it. I was always into horror.
Yeah, me as well. Awesome. And yeah, of course, like the second two, if we were just talking about those two, you could probably connect them pretty easy, but maybe Casey and the Sunshine Band will give us a little, different type of flavor to these three topics. So let's start with Casey and the Sunshine Band and what your first impressions are when I mentioned that band.
Oh, can I go first?
Yeah.
Shake, shake, shake. Shake, shake, shake. With your booty. That's my first impression.
My first impression is wedding singers, wedding bands. Casey and the Sunshine Band is the penultimate wedding band because it seems like every single one of their songs ends up in every wedding I've ever been to.
This is very true, actually, and I hadn't thought about that, but absolutely, you cannot go to a wedding, or I would say any gathering of people where there's music without hearing a Casey and the Sunshine Band song. And me being in Southeast Florida like I am, that's actually where the band originated, which is also kind of cool that they originated in the 70s down here, a little further south from where I am, but certainly in Dade and Broward County. I'm in Broward County, Florida. They got their start on Y100, which is a massive pop radio station down here, which I thought was pretty cool. And I actually didn't know that till I started doing my research.
I don't think I knew that.
Doreen put booty. Okay, sorry. Doreen.
Oh, are you watching on YouTube?
Yeah, no, I'm kind of going back and forth.
All right, if you've got that window, then I'll leave that alone and leave you to the chat on there.
Well, yes, you can do that. I'm going back and forth just so everybody knows in case I don't get to your comments right away, because YouTube's a little delayed from what we're looking at when we're recording. I guess they put a delay on us.
Just in case. Probably not a bad idea.
All right. So what else about Casey and the Sunshine Band? Because, this was a mid 70s, late 70s into the 80s band. And just kind of, as John mentioned, the wedding music, but just fun music that I think even if you're not somebody who dances, it's kind of hard not to get up and at least move when Casey and the Sunshine Band comes on.
Yeah, it's funny, the band and they've used their songs, what was the big one they used in Wayne's World? Of course, my mind is blanking out. But
wasn't Celebration Casey and the Sunshine Band?
No, that was Kool and the Gang.
Ah, so close.
Easy to get mixed up. Yeah,
so close.
Yeah, they're both very happy kind of bands, but it wasn't like, I don't know, did they have a following? Because I know their songs were really popular, but what was the band like? I don't even know. Chris, you did the research. Were they, did they go on tour a lot? Or was it mostly radio disco music?
No, they actually were out on tour. They played a lot. Now, remember, they also came up during the time of dance television shows when we had
yes.
Right? So I don't know if they were ever on Soul Train or was it dance? Go ahead. What was the other one?
Solid Gold.
Solid Gold. Yes.
Solid Gold. Yes. That's my husband's dream. He will come in. If he heard me say that right now, he said when he was a kid, his dream was to marry a Solid Gold dancer. Didn't happen, but that was his dream when he was a little boy.
Solid Gold was the name of an adult establishment down here in South Florida. So
Ashley says American Bandstand, Dance Fever. They were big Studio 54 people, apparently.
Yeah, and
active.
that was the music of the time. I mean, what was great about it, so great about KC and the Sunshine Band and all that music was, again, like it just got you up and moving. It was feel-good music. It was fun. It was happy. The only point to their music was just to make you move. That was it. Mm-hmm. And they did a great job with it.
Now, do you think they survived as a band as well as they did in their pre-disco days, in their post-disco days? Because for me, this was a band that was riding the wave really, really high during the height of disco. And when disco, I mean, there was a huge backlash when we were growing up. You know, Shell, you're a little younger than Chris and me, but I remember being 9, 10, 11 years old and being shamed if I still like disco. My one of my pivotal memories is I remember being at a local carnival. I remember you can throw darts at like balloons to try to win those carnival mirrors. I wanted a Bee Gees mirror, and all my friends were like, "What's wrong with you? Disco sucks." You know, oh my God, you're so in the language of the time, you're so gay, you're so stupid, you know, and just the backlash against disco was like absolutely enormous. And I just remember being shamed. And I'm like, I didn't get the memo. I'm sorry. Like last week it was cool and now it's not. So of course I'm like, I was kidding. I don't want that mirror. And I went home and cried. I wanted the mirror.
If I could go back in time and like pick a time, I would want to go back to like the disco era, because I mean we all did this, right? You know, you did the shovel and the thing from the Saturday Night Fever when we were kids. Like you wanted to learn how to disco dance, and then there was the lights and the clothing and all of the things surrounding it. And then of course the Studio 54 stuff. I would love to go back and have been in the heyday of Studio 54, minus the drugs and debauchery, you know what I mean? But I would love to go back and see what a day like that would have been like.
I wouldn't want to go back minus the drugs and the debauchery. That's why I want to go, if I'm being honest. I'm not saying I'd partake in both, either or one of the other, but it's not Studio 54 without that. True, what's the point?
Yeah.
You know, am I saying I'd want to go into the basements and watch who is the guy with like the pop culture art? Andy
Warhol.
Andy Warhol, I guess, lived in the basement and doing unspeakable things to young actors. But I don't think I'd want to go down there. But I want to see that aside. I want to see it all. I would love to have been able to go back there and live that as a voyeur, not as a participant.
Yeah. Okay, you said it better than I did, because that's exactly what I would want to do too. Like a car wreck, you just can't keep your eyes off of it. Just want to see what was going on with all those people.
And yeah, and as Andrea is saying on the Facebook page, you know, she was saying boogie shoes, please don't go, and like all of that. It was so much fun. And to John's point, there was a big backlash in the early 80s to disco. And Give It Up was, I think, their last attempt at making a comeback, their song Give It Up, which the record label decided not to release because they didn't think it was going to have popularity in the US. And so they made their own label to try to push it out. And it just, by 1984, you know, there just wasn't any more disco really. And it's kind of very similar to what happened to I don't know, we call it all kinds of different names, glam rock, candy rock, whatever you want to call it. But that kind of rock, that metal in the late 80s, when grunge came in, it just crushed it. And there was no more Warrant. There was no more Winger. There was no more Motley Crue. And it was so unfortunate because they were so awesome. But that was what happened with disco. And it just got smoked in the early 80s. And that was really the end of the era. Now, they did actually released some more in the 90s because there was a little bit of a disco resurgence in the early 90s, but not with a lot of fanfare.
Well, what I remember of the whole thing and their song specifically is it seems that each song was tailor-made for a specific dance, because back then, and we were real little to remember this, I didn't really partake in all the actual disco dances, doing the hustle and all the others, you know, but that's what was going on in the discos of the time. And the songs would go to very specific beats and curated themselves in order to be able to match up with the dances. And just looking at, like 54 in the different movies that look back to it, this music would come on and everybody would instantly know what dance to do. And the entire dance floor would be filled with everybody doing the same dance, almost like a choreographed moment. And I just think that is so cool. It's like everybody does their own thing right now. But back then it was like, here's the dance. And they all went out there and did it. And I just have a hard time believing that the people that lived in those discos are the ones asking to see a manager because the early bird special ended at 6:30 and they got there at 6:35. I mean, how are these the same people? You were having sex in the bathroom at Studio 54, and now you're pissed off that you got to pay $3 more for the blue plate special. I don't get it.
It's and it's very true. And I do want to go back to what you said about the choreographed dances, because even when we got into the 80s, I think Doreen was mentioned popping and breaking. And by the way, for those of you that enjoy the Olympics, breakdancing is an Olympic sport this year. So I'm not a huge Olympics person, but I am going to tune in for breakdancing for sure, because I'm very, very curious about it. But to your point, even we had movies like Can't Buy Me Love that came out in 1987, and they all did the anteater dance. I don't know if you remember that movie, but he was trying to be the cool guy, and all of a sudden he becomes the cool guy, and he realizes he doesn't know how to dance, and so he's watching some animal show, and there's this anteater dance, and he makes it up as he goes along, and of course everybody followed, and that was very similar to the disco time, where one person would have this kind of cool dance. Nobody really knew where it came from, but everybody followed it.
Well, and like you said about the wedding dances, we always have the electric slide and things like that. I mean, everybody stands up for that stuff, and everybody, like John said, stands up for Casey and the Sunshine Band, because one of the that's the way. I like it.
That's probably one of the earliest songs I remember listening to as a kid.
Oh, and you know what song I was thinking? They used a lot of they used the Casey and the Sunshine Band in Forrest Gump, because Jenny was in the discos. That's where and speaking of debauchery, it's always implied that Jenny died of AIDS or something that that she had gotten while being a disco debauchery kind of a girl.
She taught me how to climb, and I taught her how to dangle.
That's right.
That was frightening.
I love me some Forrest Gump. Yeah. So, okay. So we talked about Casey and the Sunshine Band. Is there anything else that anybody wants to add in terms of the disco era, Casey and the Sunshine Band?
It makes me think of the movie Boogie Nights too, which I believe they use some of those songs in there too, because but I can't quite remember. But it's like you hear their music everywhere. I think kids know a lot of these songs, which is amazing to span from the early 70s. And here we are in 2024, and 50 some years later, kids know some of the Casey and the Sunshine tongue twister. Casey and the
Stacey is mentioning how she loved Casey and the Sunshine Band. She grew up in Florida at the time, and back then for her they were huge. To Chris's point earlier, the only thing I'll add to it is, why Sunshine Band? Like, was that an LSD trip connotation? Was it something, because I can the graphics and the big, or was it just what they decided on?
How they came up with it?
Yeah.
I can cheat a little bit here. Somebody was mentioning his first name, Casey's first name, and it was, I believe it was Wayne or Harry Wayne Casey. But yeah, I was looking to see how they came up with it, but there was like a,
Kristen says it's because they were from Florida, which is the Sunshine State, and that his name was Harry Casey.
Yes. And they originally, though, were Casey and the Sunshine Junkanoo Band, because Casey used studio musicians from a local Junkanoo band, which is really cool music, by the way. So, it's a fascinating story how they became as big as they were. And actually, one of them passed away in a bulldozer accident, believe it or not, back in the early 2000s. So I don't know if that meant that they were, had to get other jobs after the fame of KC and the Sunshine Band, but I absolutely love their music. And I do love that era a lot. I think it was just like it was almost like it was opening the door. John always talks about how a lot of decades kind of, they go into the next decade a little bit, or we start to see flashes of it maybe a little bit before. And disco was a little bit opening the door a little bit to what was the 80s, which was this kind of, we're going to talk about something that wasn't happy in the 80s. I mean, I don't know if you love horror movies, maybe it makes you happy, but it was like a happy time. There was a lot of like happiness in pop culture with disco, and it moved us right into the 80s. So are you ready to talk about something from the 80s?
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to make one other point about the KC and the Sunshine Band, though. I find it fascinating, too, that as you were talking about how music genres just sort of dropped off and that dropped off, it was like the fashion matched the music. There was flair to the disco era. There was flair to the KC and the Sunshine Band, and there was flair in their pants. You know what I'm saying? And then, then the glam metal with all that, and then we had the grunge. No flair, no bell bottoms. Damn it! Don't look at me like that.
I mean, I've got flair in my pants to this day, and that's what you get when you join the live stream, because odds are that's not going to make the cut.
That's why the live stream is great.
So much flair. I feel like now we're talking about Office Space and flair.
Oh, one of my favorite movies. We cannot go in that direction or we'll never get back on track.
And by the way, do you know who wrote and directed Office Space? Is really going to upset you, John.
Who?
Mike Judge. Do you know what Mike Judge also invented?
Invented?
Or created?
Who did he create? Oh, of course I do. Beavis and Butthead. I knew that.
Butthead, who you hate.
Yeah.
I was just gonna go.
Yeah, no, I knew that. I can love one and hate the other. I'm good with that.
Fire.
Yeah. All righty then.
Cornholio.
Okay.
Sorry, I just had to add it in there.
Oh, Ashley was asking if we're seeing the comments faster here on Facebook. I think probably on YouTube. I'm going over to Facebook just so everybody knows, but I think YouTube is probably the best place to comment. They seem to be coming up a little bit faster there.
Yeah, I mean, we just mentioned Office Space, and I see Stacy mentioning that it was the bomb and doesn't know how many times she's watched it.
Yeah.
I see all the Facebook comments from both channels here to my side, and we're getting some good comments in here. People saying they love ABBA. They mentioned Beavis, in fact, here, I'll just show it right up on the screen for everybody for John. Because we know John hates him.
Hate is a strong word. Despise probably fits better.
That's not strong at all.
Not even a little.
No.
Yeah, not even a little. All right. Okay. Anything else on KC and the Sunshine Band?
I'm good.
Everybody's good? All right. Let's move on to the next one. This one's fun. This one is a big, broad subject. And remember, if you're just joining us, there are going to be 3 topics. The first one was KC and the Sunshine Band, and all 3 of these topics are going to have a connection at the end. They connect in some way, somehow. And this next one is 80s slasher films. Now, when I first say 80s slasher films, what movie just jumps into mind for you?
Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th.
All right. Which is actually, I believe, was 1978 or 79.
Until 1999.
Yeah, right. Until Jason and Freddy
2012.
They fought in space or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, of course, with 80s slasher films, it's Friday the 13th, it's Halloween, it's Nightmare on Elm Street. These 3 that still, to this day, if you have trick-or-treaters in your neighborhood, you will almost guarantee to see a Michael Myers, a Jason, and a Freddy from kids that are like 10 years old or 8 years old.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Michael, Jason, and Freddy.
Yeah, Michael, Jason, and Freddy. Now, there were also a lot of slasher films during the 80s, and I would, it wasn't the first decade for them. We had Psycho, which is kind of like I don't know if it's the origin slasher film. I'm sure there were some before that, maybe even some in black and white, but Psycho certainly kind of put them on the map. And then we had the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which took it to another level. But the 80s really, as it did with so many things in pop culture, it took something and it just blew it up and owned it to the point where if you ask people what was the best decade for horror, a lot of people do say 80s.
And that's because I attribute that a little bit to the idea that local home video stores, and I'm not even talking about the blockbusters, I'm talking about the local home video stores who bought the B-level movies to rent out to people. They didn't have all the big blockbusters because they couldn't afford the big names to rent out as often. They bought all these B-level horror movies. I've seen so many of them that it's ridiculous, but I think it coincided with that. We went to the store and we're like, well, I can't get the popular one. The box is empty. I have to pick a B-level horror movie. And then we loved it. We learned to love it. It was the only thing left on the shelves sometimes. And I don't know, I think it has a huge following.
So in the 80s and 90s, there was we didn't say let's go. I mean, we did, but as often as we said, let's go to the video store and grab a video, more often than not, for me, there was a genre to our movie nights. We would say, let's have a horror movie night. Or if you were dating somebody, I remember my girlfriend saying, can we just have like a rom-com kind of night? Or a comedy night. So we already had in mind before we ever got to the video store, maybe not necessarily the movie, but we knew we were coming home with horror movies, for instance. And that was probably the one that excited me the most as a kid, in my teens and into my 20s. I loved horror movie night. And to Shell's point, maybe we'd already seen Friday the 13th at this point. Maybe there wasn't a new Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but maybe we'd revisit Poltergeist. Maybe we'd watch Spellbinder or Children of the Corn or Witchboard, which is a horror movie that taps into our next topic, Ouija board. And these weren't big productions we saw in the theater, but as long as there were a jump scare or two in them, we were good with it. That's all we needed out of it.
And I had a commenter here, and I posted it on the thing here. A lot of them were PG rated too. We can't forget this. They were not R rated, or some of them I could think of watching. And people are naming a lot of the movies here, like Faces of Death. I mean, like everybody saw Faces of Death, and I was only, I don't even know how old, when those things came out.
Yeah, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg. Are you guys getting a little bit of an echo? I'm sorry. Like I am, and I don't know why. I'm not getting it from you, John, but I'm getting it from me and Shell. So if nobody else is hearing it out there, then we'll just keep going. But I think we're just like the tip of the iceberg in terms of all these different slasher films. And I know somebody was mentioning a few. Ashley mentioned Children of the Corn scared the shit out of her. Of course, yes, absolutely. Evil Dead. I saw Evil Dead in a park at like midnight with all of these other people, and it was terrifying to watch it in that environment. But we also even had these movies like Sleepaway Camp, My Bloody Valentine, The Gate. If you ever saw The Gate, not exactly slasher, more like I don't know, like these little monsters, ghoulies, like the ghoulies. Yeah. But to the point that, again, when we talk about music in the 80s, we always talk about how one genre like hip hop had all these splinter genres. And the same goes for horror in the 80s. When we talk about all the different genres, but specifically for today, these slashers that just really scared the hell out of us. Cause I was a kid. I was 12 or 13 years old. I'm watching these movies, unbeknownst to my parents and then being horrified by it.
Well, and I love how the 80s movies resulted in kids, when we got to our 20s, we revisited them with the Scream series, which was a slasher movie, horror movie that made fun of the premise of the slasher movies, horror movies. And I would submit they did an amazing job with it. Especially the original Scream, I loved how they laid it all out. And maybe for the first time for a lot of us, we started realizing those tropes that are existent in almost every horror movie. The virgin is the one that makes it out alive at the end. The kids that are engaging in dangerous behavior, illicit behavior, the drugs, the sex, the being where they shouldn't be, doing what they shouldn't be doing. That never ended well. These were cautionary tales. These were our version of, those fables where we grew up that was supposed to tell us, hey, don't engage subconsciously. It warned us, do this and bad things happen. And I love how Scream just turned it on its head. And I just remember one line specifically, the dumb bimbo who's running up the stairs when she should be running out the door. And you see it in every horror movie. She runs upstairs, she goes to the bedroom, and she hides in the closet with the levered doors, the louvered doors on the closet.
It was always that because if you look at the lists of like movies, there was this whole subgenre of even like if you're beautiful, you're getting murdered tonight. You're the sorority sister slashers and the don't go to like you said, don't have sex out in the woods because that's it. You're done. You're getting it. You're the next one on the list. That was. They had so many of those. If you were attractive, you were off. And then she was always dumb too, like you said.
And I want to mention, because Ashley mentioned it, although it's not kind of quote unquote slasher, but Hellraiser. That movie is so underrated. And Pinhead. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So underrated. Not exactly slasher, but more like just kind of supernatural, creepy as hell type of.
They still slash the hell out of people. I think the definition of slasher is mutilation and just ripping people to shreds. And Hellraiser did it more than some.
Yeah, Janet's on here, and she said the guy with the pinhead, that was Hellraiser. And I remember the one guy was with that little box, and they got like meat hooks, and it literally shredded him with meat hooks, like just tiny little meat hooks, just shredded him. I mean, and they, and speaking of though, I mean, I guess the slasher film never died because like Saw, when the Saw films came out and started, and I don't know when they started, they're basically a higher level thought level of a slasher movie.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing about it, somebody mentioned earlier about going to the video store and maybe that movie, we've talked about this before, the movie that you wanted isn't there, so you're going to look for other one. But I remember the covers of these slasher films. I mean, obviously you had the ones that began to have the larger budgets. So once Friday 13th, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, once they showed they could make money, then the budgets became a little bit larger. But a lot of these slasher films, the covers looked real. Like it was really gritty. It was not, the special effects obviously are not what they are today, the CGI and everything else. So it was very gritty and it felt real in a lot of ways. I would go back to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, although it was not an 80s slasher. But if you go back and watch that movie, it feels like a documentary. It's kind of creepy, really creepy, because they just didn't have the special effects that they have today. And the idea was really there were the ones that were just pure gore, but there were also the ones that took the Alfred Hitchcock model and were like, we're going to scare you with sound. We're going to scare you with these little things that make you jump, to John's point. And I think the covers were really gritty and creepy.
Mm-hmm. They were.
Tying back to the premise of our podcast, I just want to alert everyone to the fact that Doreen from Tampa Bay thinks she has a guess forming already in her head as far as your connection. So I'll be honest, I'm still clueless over here. But it'd be nice. Maybe somebody in the audience will get it this week. That would be a first.
I would love it.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
So the other thing about these 80s slasher movies that I loved is it was a first look for a lot of us on people like Jamie Lee Curtis, Kevin Bacon. It really was a start for some of the names that became huge in Hollywood. Like you said, low budget, easy entry for someone, and yet as a result of it, they ended up getting seen by so many people. Even Corey Feldman, if I'm remembering correctly, took a turn in the Friday the 13th movies, and ended up being like a pseudo mini Jason throughout one of the subplots. Somebody fact check me, but I think I'm remembering that right.
I don't remember that one, but that's kind of awesome.
Johnny Depp from Nightmare on Elm Street, that's another one.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was Johnny was pretty. See, he was the gorgeous boy. He was about to get murdered in a fountain of blood. That's what happened.
In a crop T-shirt, which was a big deal in the 80s.
Oh my God.
Right.
I forgot about that.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a crop T-shirt?
Me? Of course I did.
I did not. I mean, I was 45 pounds soaking wet till I was about 17, so there's no need for me to show every rib I had by wearing a crop top T-shirt.
Chris, was yours the net kind? You know, like where there was the net and you could see. Confession, I actually have one of those. I don't ask. Just it's a costume. So
I mean, no, I did not have a net one, but I did have one that said "Sun's out, guns out."
Oh,
yeah. And I'm sure I had one with like yeah, exactly, yeah. I'm sure I had one that had like a Camaro on it or a Fiero or a Trans Am or something.
Nice.
Yeah. So I also I do want to mention too that beyond just the ones that we remember, and by the way, like I said, we're just touching the surface. We haven't even mentioned movies like Child's Play. I mean, Chucky. Mm-hmm. But some of the names. Some of the names of these movies, The Dorm That Dripped Blood was one. That's to John's point. Like, you didn't need a lot of money to make a horror film. Butcher, Baker, Nightmare Maker was another one. The Grave Robbers. Here's a good one. Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers. And again, this goes back to how big the 80s were and how awesome they were in terms of the experimentation that was happening all across pop culture and the willingness and the ability for people to create and do it cheaply, albeit maybe not very good, but we had all of this stuff out there and the slasher category was full of it.
The other thing is I loved about slasher movies in the 80s and the tropes that they had was it was literally a living nightmare, because I think we've all had the nightmare where we just can't get away from that bad guy, from that monster, from that kill. And it wasn't like Freddy or Jason specifically or Michael Myers specifically were running at you full tilt. They were just walking. They were taking their time coming at you. There was no rush. There was no pep in their gait. And the girl is running full tilt through the woods and, of course, falling down every fourth step. And he gets her. And I love looking back at them. I'm like, how it made no sense. And yet it terrified us. She would fall every fourth step. And when it seemed like she was going to get away from him, that's when she decided to jump into the car that wouldn't start. And that was the end. Or hide behind a tree that was like this thick. And you could clearly see her behind the tree.
That was and then they always screamed in that same way. I was making the face like, like their hands always went up and they were, yeah.
We got to do a collaborative video on our social media making fun of an 80s horror flick. We need to do that scene. That would be an awesome collaboration.
That's a great one because all I think of when I think
if we have a Friday the 13th on the calendar coming up in the next couple months, peg it. That's what we got to do.
That's what we do have to do. Somebody's got to be the Jason or the whatever, and all the girls are running, but the guys are just walking. Yeah,
that's what Jody said. Jody said on Facebook, the people always fall in those movies. Why? And that was part of, I don't know. as much as everybody knows how big of an 80s person I am, but this was, again, it's kind of like the cheesiness of some of this stuff made it awesome, and it just can't be replicated. And to John's point about Scream making fun of all the tropes, I mean, that was one of the biggest ones. In fact, there's I can't remember what beer commercial it is, but it's a reference to the 80s movies and exactly what so many of you were talking about, because they're hiding from the guy and he's got the chainsaws and they're like, let's hide in here. This looks like a good place. And there's all these chainsaws hanging there. And then they're trying to be quiet. And they've got the one guy's like, don't touch me. And she's like, shut up. And they're doing all the things that you shouldn't do. And of course the girl runs and falls, and somebody may be able to it's a very funny commercial, funnier than I am explaining it, but I can't remember which beer it is. Maybe somebody knows, but it just came out in the last couple of years, and it's actually referencing these 80s slasher films.
Well, it's funny.
I think that's the one you said, that they're in the barn and there's all those like implements of horror in there, and they're like, no, we can't. We should be safe here. You know, that was the best thing about it.
And you're yelling at the screen like, why are you
making
that noise? Why are you going? Like Jason just walked by, so now, okay, we're clear for me to come out of my hiding spot now. You know, and I'm thinking to myself, if I'm going to find a hiding spot, I'm going to play dead there and I'm going to breathe.
Dude, I live there. I'm like, send my mail here. I'm going nowhere until daylight, because daylight was safe. Every one of these movies, once you got to morning, it's like the sun would come up and it's like, thank God you made it through the night. And that was the sigh of relief. They all died throughout the night. And then they would save the one final jump scare for the very end. And you know what I'm talking about. Jason's dead. He's on the ground. And what do? Instead of using the back door by the kitchen, they gingerly try to step over his dead body in order to go out the front door. And of course, he's not dead. So he comes up and makes that grab for the final jump scare of the movie. Me, I'm thinking I pump him full of lead until the cop shows up to stop me.
You beat him with it.
Yeah, I'm done. And then I'm going out the back door. I'm like, screw this. And then, of course, you turn around, look over your shoulder as you're leaving, and he's gone. Because they need him around for the next movie.
That's right. Yeah.
I love it. I love everything about horror movies like that. Somebody mentioned Stephen King. It's a horror movie. It's not necessarily a slasher movie, and that's the distinction.
You know, and yes, the slasher, though, you can kind of... I term a slasher movie as anything that was super bloody.
Yeah.
You know, like I would say Carrie, because somebody mentioned the Stephen King. You know, Carrie was like a suspenseful movie.
Yeah.
And Cujo was a bloodier movie, like, you know, a little bit. It's all
but I think the slasher has to have that protagonist. It has to have a leprechaun. It has to have a Chucky. It has to have a Michael Myers, Jason. It's got to have one of those. And it's a different class of horror movie. And my favorite. I mean, I want to watch one tonight.
Jennifer Aniston, Leprechaun.
That's right. Yeah.
First movies.
Our friends mentioned for the episode.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
We always mention Friends.
And some other titles that you might find hilarious. Nail Gun Massacre. That was one that follows a young doctor and a sheriff seeking a killer in a motorcycle helmet who is murdering locals with a nail gun. The Girls' School Screamers is another one. That sounds like that could be in another category as well.
Along with the flare.
I thought the flare. Mountaintop Motel Massacre. I mean, I could go on and on with some of these crazy names. I will say to everybody out there, if you do like the 80s slasher films, there is an American Horror Story season called 1984.
Yeah.
And it's really good, and it's a lot of fun, and it's got a ton of, obviously, 80s references. So if you haven't seen that and you can handle a little bit of blood and guts from American Horror Story, I would highly recommend 1984.
There was also most recently, whether it was on Netflix or Hulu, I'm not sure where, but there was an 80s slasher, like this girl goes back in time to the 80s through a time machine and basically ends up living through an 80s horror movie. Yeah. And it's just funny as she's laughing at the misogyny. She's like appalled. She's like, what is going on here? You know, because listen, if you're younger, if you're someone of today's more socially, let me just say, socially aware generate. Things evolve, things change without any judgment. Things are different today than they were then. You cannot see an 80s movie and enjoy it if you're going to get hung up over the fact that big boobed bimbos are the ones that get taken down, and it's intentional. I had friends that were black that as soon as they would see a black person show up on Friday the 13th, like, he's going to be the first one gone. As soon as he utters, "I'll be back," he's never coming back. No way they're making it through the movie. There was always one black kid in the movie who acted horribly stereotypically black, and he was dead immediately. Is it right? No. A lot of this stuff isn't right, but you got to look back at it with a sense of humor and say, this is where we were. And because we were there, it allowed us to come to where we are today. For better, for worse, some better, some worse.
And I would also add, by the way, yes, Andrea, it was Geico. Thank you so much. It's the Geico commercial. It wasn't a beer commercial. It was Geico. That commercial with all of the horror movie tropes. Yeah, that movie that you're talking about, I can't remember what it's called. It's on Amazon Prime.
That's what it was. And it was enjoyable. It really was enjoyable because I like when they look back and make fun of the way things were without being overly judgmental about it.
Yeah.
It's just the way it was.
And it was, and to somebody mentioned earlier, teenagers doing teenage things, that got you killed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that was it. That was what it was. And it was, I don't know what the statement was there about, what you should or should not be doing. It's kind of funny to me that anytime you were experimenting, you got killed.
It was telling us kids who were very much latchkey kids with no adult supervision, this was a way of scaring us straight. Don't engage in these behaviors because if you do, it's going to end badly. If you're skinny dipping after doing pot on the beach and having sex with a stranger, Jaws will eat you. That's the way it is.
That's right. That's right. Jaws will eat you.
Skinny dipping was a very specific sort of bad behavior. And I think Stacy said it. Let's go for a swim in the lake. As soon as the girl's got her shirt off, her or the guy, one of them's dead instantly. They don't even get to have the fun of the act before going out. They're dead before their toes ever hit the water.
Yeah. And it seemed the more egregious or I don't know, outside the morals thing you were doing, the worse the slaughter you had.
Oh, without a doubt, dude. There was one Friday the 13th where a guy was setting up the stereotypical guy's dream. He was going to end up with these two girls. And before they even get to his bedroom, he's done. And they're both climbing into bed with his dead corpse. I mean, he didn't even get to do it, and he was gone. In a very warped sense, I love everything about these movies.
Yeah.
Throw judgment out the window. Just sit back and enjoy it for what it was.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm a huge fan. I've seen so many of them. I can't even tell you that Friday night horror, go pick 3 movies thing. Yeah.
And if you want a fun song to reflect on these slasher films, there is DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, A Nightmare on My Street. You'll laugh when you're listening to it. Believe me now. Just go, if you haven't heard it in a while, go listen to it. You're going to love it. It's going to make you laugh. All right.
Pivot?
So what? Go ahead.
Pivot?
Yeah. You guys ready to go to the next one?
Yeah.
And I just like saying pivot.
Pivot. Pivot.
Pivot!
Pivot.
The last thing I was going to say was the classic thing you said in the 80s was
yeah.
See, I always heard kill, 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 chop, 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 chop.
Yeah.
But there were no real words. You were right.
Mm-hmm.
Would actually say Jaws never scared me. Piranha had me holding my pee till morning because I just knew those damn fish were under my bed.
I think it was Chucky that had me afraid. You know how the most comfortable thing on a summer night was to leave like 1 foot out from the blanket hanging over the edge of the bed. And I was convinced that little fucker was underneath the bed just waiting to grab an ankle. So I would sweat it out. I am not, for some reason, if all body parts were under the blanket, I was safe. The minute you hang one over the edge of the bed, it's game over.
That's how I was with this little known horror movie. I think it came out in the late 70s. It was called Trilogy of Terror.
Oh, yes.
that little like doll or whatever it was.
It was a puppet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was also
like the one you had.
Like the one I had. And that was the ventriloquist doll. That was
that's right. That's right.
God, what was that movie called? It was the ventriloquist and the doll was killing everybody. And he knew his ventriloquist doll was killing everyone. Somebody has to know it in the comments. It was I'm man. Sure. I gotta know now. Like, what the hell was that name of that movie? I don't know.
Puppet Master?
What?
Puppet Master? That was one.
No, that was one, but no, this was like this ventriloquist doll. I gotta Google it because it's gonna drive me nuts before we pivot.
Shell, was there ever like a wood chipper in the backwoods of Pennsylvania type of horror movie that you particularly had a liking of?
I don't know. I was so used to horror movies that I was not afraid of the dark as a kid. I was like, because in my mind,
Dead of Night, says Doreen.
No, Magic. It was called Magic. It was Anthony Hopkins. It was Anthony Hopkins. He was the ventriloquist.
I do not remember.
Magic. It'll scare the hell out of you. I mean, now that you know Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, it'll probably scare you more.
Mm-hmm. He's good.
Yeah. 1978. Richard
Never heard of it.
Directed it. Wow. And it actually won the Edgar Award for Best Motion Picture Screenplay. Okay. So
there's that.
There's that. I always thought it was just this weird movie, but apparently it was
a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
So Magic. There you go. If you want to get scared, watch Magic. Oh, yeah. And Margaret as well. Yes. Very good. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Are you guys ready to move on to the next one?
Definitely.
We're going to pivot, as Ross said, and we're going to go to a Ouija board. Now, I want to get your first impressions of the Ouija board, but I do need to say that, again, the time that we grew up in was so interesting because you could walk into a Toys R Us or wherever they had board games, and you would literally have Candyland, Chutes and Ladders, Life, Operation, and a Ouija board. Like, I mean, right next to it, like calling dead spirits.
Do they not still do that? Like, does Parker Brothers Ouija board not in the toy section anymore?
I don't know, but I remember that it was right next to Chutes and Ladders, which is so weird.
Yeah, well, because it's a Parker Brothers game. I mean, I recently found a Ouija board, and if you go to my social media, you'll see that entire debacle that came out of it. But I bought it for $2.50 in a thrift store, and I did not remember. I thought these things were like some kind of weird. No, this was a glow-in-the-dark version made, manufactured, and distributed by Parker Brothers. So I'm like, how evil can this thing be if they're making it at Parker Brothers?
Evil.
But did you ever, when you were at that age, play it? Because we used to play it all the time. We did. That's why I said you could summon demons by the time you were 8. Of course, we know that's not real, but that's what they were originally used for. These were seance boards. I mean, and they've been around for how long?
We never used a Ouija board. I grew up in a very small town. I guess at our local 5 and dime toy store, whatever, they just didn't have it there. My mom probably would not have been a big fan had she known what they were, because of the whole premise of inviting demons into the home, into your heart, into your body. There's that. My wife wouldn't let me bring the one I bought into the house, and because I tried to get rid of it and it made its way back to me, it's still sitting outside our garage. I think I'm gonna. People are like, burn it. This is plastic. The fumes. I can't burn it, so I don't know what I'm doing with it. But
no, you know what?
We did have a seance.
I think if you burn it, all the spirits in the board are going to come out. Then you're going to have a big problem on your hands. Like, I would highly recommend not burning it. And
someone says you can still get them at Walmart for like $20. That's Michelle commenting. But no, we had seances, and we were kids at a time when there were some really cool people we tried to bring back. I remember trying to bring Elvis back. I remember in 1976 being 6-7 years old with my older brother and older cousins. We're talking still a decade from the JFK assassination, trying to bring JFK back to tell us who really killed him. So I remember doing those things. I remember having seances in actual cemeteries. We were sick little bastards.
We used to play Bloody Mary in the mirror if you said it in the dark so many times with a flashlight always under your chin, because it was required if you were telling a story or if you were doing anything like that, flashlight under the chin, and you say Bloody Mary, and she was supposed to come back. Or
We said, Black Aggie.
I don't know who she was.
Black Aggie, I heard too.
Black Aggie was
Yeah.
Why has it got to be black? What? But why?
We had the thing.
Why has it got to be Bloody Mary? It's a drink, for crying out loud. I don't get it. What was the movie? To get back to horror movies for a second, Candyman. That's right.
Candyman.
Say Candyman 3 times. Lizzie Borden, says Doreen. I remember trying to bring Lizzie Borden, trying to bring her back.
Mm-hmm.
So Angela also said, asked if I had that doll. Sorry, I want to go back to that real quick. I got rid of that doll after I saw the movie. I threw it away, and thankfully, unlike Poltergeist, it didn't end up sitting on my chair and then under my bed. So I was thankful for that. But I will say, you mentioned Lizzie Borden. So that was what was interesting about the Ouija board for me and my friends. We were always trying to get, I don't know why, we were trying to open the gates of hell. Like we wanted to talk to Jack the Ripper, or, Lizzie Borden to I don't know who that was, Angela's point, I think. We were looking to try to bring evil people back on our board. And we weren't looking to talk to someone's dead grandparent or uncle. No. Let's get the worst people on earth and talk to them.
Did you just say you didn't know who Lizzie Borden was?
No, I know who Lizzie Borden was.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her parents 40 whacks. And then when she saw what she had done, she gave her
someone 41
or something. Yeah.
And now there's questions about whether she actually did it, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we would try to bring back the worst people ever. These killers, these slashers, as I mentioned earlier. And I don't know why we did that, but we did the same thing John did. We would go out to the cemetery at night with a Ouija board. What the hell were we thinking?
We even added production value to ours. I remember sitting on my neighbor's. So when I was growing up, we lived in a house we lived in one part of the house. We had a neighbor, somebody lived in the upstairs part of the house. And the weird thing is, I remember we had the downstairs, she had the upstairs, but back then, what we used as a closet was just a door closing off the downstairs from the upstairs. You opened it up, you saw stairs going upstairs. She could lock her door at the top, we could lock our door at the bottom. And let me tell you, that caused me no small amount of anxiety as a child, wondering if I'd lock the door before going to sleep, because I will tell you, the 5 years we lived at that house, I never saw the other person that lived in the house with us. And if I did, I have no memory of it. But considering that we shared a home, we went in one side, they went in, and I never saw them. But I remember they're the one that had the larger porch. So all of us sat on the porch one night at midnight on a beautiful summer night. And that's when we realized Lysol was incredibly flammable. We took a Lysol can, put a ring all the way around, did a Lysol pentagram, lit it on fire with a couple of smoke bombs, and held a seance with this evil pentagram on fire, which literally burned into the wood on the porch. There was a pentagram burnt into her porch. Or his porch from every moment thereafter. I don't think we ever got caught. I don't think they knew it was us. But I remember that morning going up to see what we had done, and we had burnt a pentagram into their porch.
Now, did you also do the thing where you pretended like you were going to go do something innocent, like say in the woods, but you were the type that weren't scared? So you always drug your really scaredy cat friend with you and just, it'll be fine. And then you had something elaborate planned out where you were going to scare the living bejesus out of them.
I was the one that got dragged.
You were the one.
I will say, getting to the Ouija board for a minute, one comment I had, which I think is brilliant, if my wife would allow it, they told me to take it, put it up in my attic, and leave black candles and a pentagram with the Ouija board there and just forget about it. And someday when we sell the house, let that be the only thing left behind.
That'd be pretty awesome. That would be pretty cool.
Because if you ever used a Ouija board with your friends, everybody was convinced that they felt it move, but it moved. It did move, and there have been people that have explained why it moves, but it actually does move. And I'm like, I didn't move it. And you believed everybody.
How did but I don't understand. So it moves to spell something, but you all have to be working in tandem to get it to go to the same letter.
Yeah, but I think, but I think that there was everybody wanted it to work. So if one person just put a little bit of pressure on it, and you would kind of go with it because you really wanted it to work. And I mean, I know I was guilty of that. Like, I really, really wanted it to work. I don't know why, but there was also a movie based on the Ouija board called The Witch Board. That came
I've seen it.
1986. And also, I do want to point out that beyond just being all over popular culture, as most of you probably know, in pop culture, that the Ouija board has been literally everywhere. It's also the first indicators of a Ouija board were in actually 1100 AD in China. So this is not, again, this goes back to when there were a lot of unknowns and people were trying to explain things. I'm guessing here. They were trying to explain things, either explain them away or explain why they happened. And that's part of the allure and the history of the Ouija board, is that it's been around for so long and it's got a lot of stories to tell. And I think that's really cool as well.
People brought up Exorcist when I started talking about the Ouija board. Was there a Ouija board in Exorcist?
Yes, Captain Howdy.
See, I don't remember that.
Yeah, she was calling Captain. Was it Howdy? Yeah, Captain Howdy.
I was never scared by The Exorcist. It didn't even leave an indelible imprint on my memory. I don't remember much about it. I thought we talk about special effects back then because they were more simple, being more real. But like the pea soup puking and as soon as the bad special effects took front, it took me out of the movie. Like my suspension of disbelief, even as a young kid, I'm like, this is so hokey that it took me out of it.
Huh.
You're off my list, Christmas card list.
I will also say that here's
John.
You want to hear like a fun fact about the Ouija board that is like really weird and odd?
Yes.
Yeah.
In London in 1994, convicted murderer Stephen Young was granted a retrial after it was learned that 4 of the jurors had conducted a Ouija board seance and had contacted the murdered man who had named Young as his killer. Wow. Young was convicted a second time at a retrial and jailed for life. But yeah, some jurors used it to contact, I guess, to decide whether he was guilty or not.
Wow. Yeah.
Didn't want them on my jury.
Yeah.
What's that?
But no, and I always call it a Ouija board. We always called it a Ouija.
So did we, but I think until I saw it, I didn't realize it was spelled with an A. So it's spelled Ouija board, but we always said Ouija board too.
Ouija board, yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually, if you go back and you look again throughout history, how the Ouija or Ouija board ended up where it is today, it's kind of fascinating because it was a very real thing for a lot of people throughout history. And it was actually part of the history of it is that they were using it to try to find people after the Civil War for survivors who wanted to contact soldiers that were family members that had passed away. Mm. And then the Ouija was actually named in 1890, was named the Ouija by a medium in Baltimore, Maryland, where I grew up. So there's 2 connections there. I have KC and the Sunshine Band where I live now, and Baltimore and the Ouija where I grew up, which is kind of cool, but that is not the connection, by the way. So it wasn't until actually in 1901 when the first time that it became like kind of a commercial parlor game, and then got to the point where it was next to Chutes and Ladders in Toys R Us.
Mm-hmm. It was a brown box whenever we were younger. Like, yeah. John showed a picture of his on his social media, and it was in this big purplish box, but it was always in a brown box with the little, plastic.
And I think it was brown like that because it was presumably, it looked like wood because the original board games were wood. So and the reason I think mine was purple is it was this glow in the dark plastic board. So they changed it. It's just this fascination with the occult. Like, I'm having the hardest time. I can connect the last two of this trilogy of topics so easily, a million different ways. Bringing Casey and the Sunshine Band into it is just beyond, I don't know. But the other two, I mean, we had this fascination with the occult, with horror, light as a feather, stiff as a board, lifting each other up somehow. I never have been witness to that. Working people attest to the fact that 2 fingers, they raised up a 300-pound person. I don't know. Huge people. They're like, we lifted them with 2 fingers.
No, I swear that it works. I would swear it. I've never done it since I was a kid, but when we were kids, we actually did this with a friend of mine, and we lifted them up off the ground. But I think at least in my mind, we did. In my mind, we lifted them off like 3 feet. We might have just like hefted them. I don't even know. And like Chris said, I wanted it to work. It's like a hypnotism. It's like we would rub their temples and then say things. Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me how, again, with the Ouija board, how so many of us tried to contact the worst people. I really, and I go back to that movie, The Gate, where they literally opened up the gates of hell and all the demons came out. And that was what they were trying to do. They were like, hey, what if we,
you would not have lasted long in a slasher film, Chris. You're the one, let's bring Jack the Ripper back. And he comes back and you're the first one he kills.
Yeah, that's it. Yep. Yeah. Thanks for bringing me back. Here's your reward. So
what do you think? We're at an hour 6. Anything you guys want to add on Ouija board? Because they're chomping at the bit in the comment section here.
Same here. I had somebody that gave a pretty detailed idea. I wanted to share that one before we even do. So maybe we take a minute and ask the audience to see if they can find a connection.
Yeah, start throwing your comments in there. What you think? I'm not going to say anything.
And I'll so that I don't cheat. The only guess I have nothing other than to say that there was a horror movie like Witchboard, which used a Ouija board in it, and maybe Casey and the Sunshine Band was on the soundtrack. That's all I can put together. That's on me.
I have a
What's
thought.
that?
I have a thought, but I'm not going to do it until we hear from some of the.
Okay, Doreen says the Boogeyman.
I'm with Doreen. That was.
I don't know what the Boogeyman is.
Comment. I did not see her comment, but that was my first thought was Boogeyman.
Oh, did Casey and the Sunshine Boogeyman was a name of one of their songs?
I'm your boogeyman. Turn me on. I'm your boogeyman. See, I can't sing, so that's why you're probably not getting it.
Ashley says guess is that Casey was in Witchboard. Stacy says the movie Zombie. Doreen's going with Boogeyman, that Casey had a song and that connecting from there on in and agreeing with Shell.
Janet says that her guess was Scooby-Doo. And this was an interesting one. That the sunshine is the van, that the slashing is the mystery, and that the board is spooky. That's a pretty neat guess if you ask me.
I'm pretty sure Casey and the Sunshine Band were in an episode of Scooby-Doo.
That's a lot more intellectual than the 3 of us could ever come up with.
Well, the 2 of us anyway. That seems to be right up Shell's alley.
No, it was a good one. I liked it, but
yeah, I feel like I want her to be in a game show with me because that's pretty good. It's not it, but that's really good. And that's like super, like, that feels like a young Sheldon answer. It's pretty awesome.
Sheila says Boogeyman as well on this end. So, I mean, we got them siding with Shell. Looks like they may have figured it out. I'm still sitting over here lost on this one. My Casey and the Sunshine Band knowledge has failed me.
Yeah, there's this song, I'm your boogeyman, and then in the slasher films, there was usually always a boogeyman. And in the Ouija board, you were literally trying to summon the boogeyman. So that was my thought. People said it here.
That's right. You guys got it.
We did.
There it is.
Yes, you got it. The boogeyman. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it has two definitions. It's one connection, but obviously KC and the Sunshine Band, when they said I'm your boogeyman, they were not talking about the boogeyman. They were talking about being your dancing partner or other partner, for whoever it was, what people did in slasher films to get killed. But that was a different definition from I'm your boogeyman to the boogeyman. So very well done. I wasn't
Congratulations.
sure. Get it. Yeah.
We got to hand that over to Doreen.
Good job, Doreen and Sheila and Ashley and Chell. Proud of you guys. You nailed it.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome.
I got nothing. It wasn't me. I missed it this time. Now, you mentioned there was a second sort of way to get to it.
Yeah.
Well, what I was saying was there are two definitions for the word boogeyman, because when KC and the Sunshine Band were singing I'm your boogeyman, they were not talking about, being under your bed, probably being
on your bed.
In your bed.
On your bed. Yeah.
With flair.
That's different type of boogeyman.
With flair. Flair in your pants and all that good stuff.
Different
all right, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. But I thought,
like I said, I could have come up with lots of way to get to the last two, just that my knowledge failed me a little bit. But you know what? That's the point of this is I think like this episode, we did exactly like what we hoped to do. We're able to talk about three different topics that are reminiscent of three different decades almost, because you had the 70s, you had the Ouija board that goes all the way through up until even today, and you had 80s slasher films that continues to have a presence today. But beyond that, we brought it into the present and talked about how those things relate. And then finally, I didn't know a lot about Casey. I learned some and still was able to talk about it. And I love it. I think it was a great trilogy of topics, Chris. I think you killed it. You absolutely crushed it. And I think for those watching at home, I think our new format of doing this live, what do you win, Doreen? We don't do participation trophies. Sorry, wrong era, wrong people. You get nothing and you'll like it.
You'll get it. Maybe we'll find. Maybe we'll come up with like a Def Leppard mirror that you would have won by hitting 3 balloons with darts at the carnival back in the day.
But not a Bee Gees because disco sucks.
we need to get a ThreeView mirror made and give those out as
there you go.
A little thing there. We get somebody to print one of those on a mirror for us. That'd be awesome. But so Janet here said, if we make a scary picture suddenly pop up on the podcast, she's going to have to pee herself.
Well, I loved it. Looking forward to next week. This is going to be something we're going to carve out time for. 5:30 looks like it's going to be our new launch time. Apologize for coming in late today. The logistics of it got a little away from us, but seems like it's under control, only bigger and better from this point on.
Yeah. A lot of fun. And we appreciate all of you coming out and hanging with us. It means a lot to us. I feel like we've all, like back in the day, we all like drove our bikes to one person's house and all of our bikes are in the front yard right now. And then of course, once we come off of this live, we'll all hop on our bikes and go home before the street lights come on. And of course to have some really, really, hopefully some good dinner that one of our parents have cooked up, because if you were like me, you never cooked. Even if it was a chopped up hot dog, I was happy with it. So we really appreciate all of you coming out. It means a lot to us. We love this. We want to see it grow. We could use your help with that. If you have friends that you think would enjoy this, have them subscribe so that they can get the live link as well as we move forward. And we love the participation here. We hope that you love this format too.
Absolutely.
Next week, it's me bringing the 3 topics. I think I've already got one. And Doreen, you will not get it, is my prediction.
Nobody ever gets John's.
Sometimes.
So once in a great while. It's mine though too. Nobody gets mine either. So I need
nobody gets mine because it's some obscure fact that somehow slipped by us. You're like, I didn't realize they were in that movie or that happened. Nobody gets yours, Shell, because it's pure fiction. You create things that never existed, never happened outside the realm of your own imagination.
We have a couple out there. We haven't put as many out on the podcast page. We have a backup of these, by the way, that were filmed not in front of a live studio audience. We got to put some of those out there. We've got some good ones.
All right, guys. Well, next week it's me, as I mentioned, and stay tuned. See you guys next week.
Thank you all. Thank you, Andrea, for being on Facebook. Sorry we didn't get to all your comments, but I appreciated all your interaction there as well.
See ya.
Boom.
Bye.